She loved him in silence, until that night changed everything. He was her brother's best friend, which meant he was off limits, unreachable, untouchable. His name was Zihan, calm, quiet, with eyes that always seemed to be watching something far away. A Chinese photography student who saw the world in colors most people ignored. And she was Chisom, the Nigerian girl with fire in her laugh and softness in her eyes. Her brother's baby sister, the one who was always around, back when they were kids. Back when Zihan would ruffle her hair and call her little star. She hated it, loved it, fell in love with him because of it. But he never noticed, not really, until she returned. 3 years had passed since Chisom left for boarding school in Johannesburg. Her parents thought it was better. More structure, more culture, more discipline. So they sent her away, even though her heart stayed in Guangzhou. She tried to forget him. She failed. Now, she was back, for summer, older, taller, different. And he was even more breathtaking. Zihan had grown too. He no longer wore graphic tees and messy sneakers. Now, he moved like he owned his solitude, always dressed in quiet grays, deep blues. His camera always slung around his neck like an extra limb. He barely looked at her the first day she came back. A polite smile, a nod. "You've grown." That was it. But that night, she saw him on the rooftop of their apartment complex, sitting alone, watching the stars, like he used to. She walked up quietly. He didn't turn, so she sat. "Still chasing galaxies?" she said softly. He smiled then, just a little. "Only the ones that don't burn out." Over the weeks, they saw each other more. Not intentionally, not at first. Her brother Tunde was always out with friends or working on his tech startup, which meant the apartment was quiet, empty. Except for Zihan, who came over often to borrow things, to drop things off, to fix the leaky sink, to bring groceries when it rained. He was always just there. And Chisom didn't know if it meant anything until the night he invited her to his studio. "I need help sorting prints," he said. "Your brother bailed. Come?" Her heart nearly collapsed in her chest. She went. The studio was small, neat, smelled like ink and cinnamon tea. Photographs lined the walls, faces of strangers, city lights, children dancing in puddles. Zihan was focused, calm, like always, until she picked up a photo of herself. It was her, at 16, laughing, wind in her braids, looking right at the camera. "You kept this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and in that look, she knew. He saw her, not as Tunde's little sister, not as a child, as her. They didn't kiss that night, but they almost did. Fingers brushed, breath caught, eyes locked. Then she stepped back, and he let her. The next morning, he was gone. No texts, no visits, no rooftop. Gone. Chisom broke. Quietly, she told no one. She finished summer, left again. Told herself it meant nothing, that she imagined it all, that she made it bigger than it was. But her heart didn't lie. Every photo she saw reminded her of his eyes. Every silent night reminded her of that rooftop, of the moment that nearly happened, of the words that stayed unspoken. She tried to distract herself. She traveled, took up painting, learned Korean, dated briefly, a boy who smiled too easily and never noticed when her laughter wasn't real. But nothing replaced the ache. Nothing silenced the memory of that quiet goodbye. Sometimes, she would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her dorm room, wondering if he ever thought about her. If he ever regretted leaving so suddenly. If he missed the version of her that only he had truly seen. She even started writing letters, unsent, unfinished, tucked into the back of her notebooks. Letters that started with, "If you had stayed," or, "I never got to tell you." 1 year later, she returned for good. This time, to start university. She didn't expect anything, but fate doesn't ask for permission. He was at the bookstore, in line. She turned, he turned, and there he was, older, a little tired. But when he saw her, something shattered in his eyes. She smiled. He didn't. Not yet. "Hi," she said. He stared for a second longer than necessary. Then, I kept the photo. They didn't speak much after that, but 2 days later, she found a package outside her dorm room. Inside was a photo album. The first picture, her. The second, stars. The third, an empty rooftop. Then one of a quiet boy, eyes turned toward the sky. And finally, one she didn't recognize. It was them. Sitting side by side, backs to the camera, watching the stars. Captioned, "Only the ones that don't burn out." But their story didn't end there. It was only beginning. That semester, they began to cross paths more and more. In the quiet corners of the library, in the hallway after class, in the art building where she now took digital design. And each time, the conversations grew a little longer. The silences became more meaningful. He brought her coffee one rainy morning. Black, no sugar. Exactly how she used to drink it when she stayed up late reading fan fiction. She laughed when she saw the cup. He didn't say anything, just smiled. One evening, she found a note slipped into her sketch pad. It simply read, "The stars are out tonight. Rooftop?" She went. He was already there, waiting. This time they didn't need small talk. This time he looked at her and asked, "Did you ever think about that night?" She didn't lie. All the time. He nodded, slowly. "I left because I was scared," he said. "Not of you, of what it meant." She said nothing. She didn't need to. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small Polaroid. It was them, that same rooftop. But this time, he'd drawn stars above them, and underneath it he'd written, "Some galaxies never burn out. They just take time." Then he reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't let go. Love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it's a quiet return, a breath you've been holding for a year, and a name that finally means home. This is Drama Rush, where we don't just watch the story, we feel it. Like, subscribe, and meet me in the next one.